And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. Thanks for joining us for our aviation section. Starting off, before we jump into the MVFR and IFR charts, I did want to mention that around 7:30 this morning on Wednesday, Bizimiani volcano in the Kamchatka Peninsula did erupt to around 40,000 feet. And early this afternoon on Wednesday, we do expect some of that ash to start making it over the western Aleutians and potentially over the central Aleutians. So keep an eye out for SIGMETs as we move forward in time if you're flying out into the Bering and Aleutians throughout the next couple days. So starting off here Thursday morning, stepping back, we're looking out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Widespread IFR conditions are expected. However, much of mainland Alaska is going to be a little bit clear with VFR conditions through most of the state. Till we get down into south central, we'll start to see some MVFR conditions, and then IFR all along the North Gulf Coast down through much of the Panhandle. Moving into Thursday afternoon, still seeing a lot of IFR for much of the areas of the north and eastern Gulf of Alaska and getting into the coastal areas as well. MVFR conditions in the southern Panhandle and some areas of south central, but again, much of mainland Alaska is still expected to be VFR throughout the day on Thursday. And then down in the southwestern coastline, starting to see some MVFR conditions come back with that next system coming in, and some IFR conditions out over much of the central and eastern Bering, and a mix of MVFR and IFR for the Aleutians. Then as we move into Friday morning, spreading out more of those IFR conditions through much of the Bering Sea and Aleutians, and starting to get some of those IFR conditions into the southwest coastline, especially around the Yukon Delta area. MVFR conditions extending into some of the western interior and through most of south central Alaska, with some IFR conditions along the North Gulf Coast and pretty widespread out over the Panhandle as well. Then Friday afternoon, clearing up to be marginal conditions in the Panhandle with IFR conditions out over the eastern Gulf and into the northeastern part of the coastline. Throughout much of mainland Alaska, MVFR conditions are expected. Still some areas way out east where we do expect some VFR conditions, and then IFR approaching along the Arctic coastline as well. So we move back over the Bering Sea and Aleutians. All the Aleutians expected to be down in IFR conditions, but as we get closer towards the Alaska Peninsula, clearing up to be more marginal. And then northern portions of the Bering also expected to be down in IFR. Taking a look at our passes starting up north, Anaktuvik is expected to be VFR throughout the day. However, there will be some afternoon thunderstorms on Thursday. That's going to be true of Adigan as well. VFR with the chance for some afternoon thunderstorms. Lake Clark and Merrill both expected to be MVFR throughout the day on Thursday. Rainy Pass also expected to be MVFR. So get a little bit farther north, Windy Pass expected to be MVFR, but the expectation of afternoon thunderstorms there as well. Isabel Pass expected to be VFR, but afternoon thunderstorms are anticipated, as well as at Mentasta VFR with those afternoon thunderstorms. Tanita Pass should be MVFR throughout the day on Thursday, and Portage should be down to IFR all day Thursday. Chilkoot and White both expected to be IFR as well. Looking at our freezing levels, you can see some of the warmer air with the ridging that we've been having pushing in throughout much of the Gulf of Alaska, and then some colder air with freezing levels down to 6,000 feet out over the central Bering Sea. Taking a look now at our icing, main area of concern here is going to be the southwest coastline out over the eastern portions of the Bering Sea. It's going to be above 9,000 feet. It's pretty high. You saw those freezing levels are pretty high up there as well. But we do have a little bit area of moderate icing coming into the Yukon Delta area, as well as Kuskokwim Delta. Jet stream, main portion of the jet is in the southern Bering Sea nearest to the eastern Aleutian Islands, up to as high as 115 knots out of a westerly direction, becoming more southerly over the west coast, the strongest winds just off the coastline at around 75 knots. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, a pretty similar pattern here. We have the westerly winds over the southern Bering getting strongest by the eastern Aleutians up to 45 knots there, and then becoming more southerly along the west coast up to around 40 knots there. Fairly light over the Panhandle area. However, we are going to see a little bit northwest winds up to around 30 knots there. Dropping down to 3,000 feet gets a lot calmer at the lower levels for the Panhandle area and much of mainland Alaska as well. But as we get out over the Bering Sea, we'll see our strongest winds here, 35 knots out of the west, out by the Alaska Peninsula, and then becoming southerly again as we get over southwest Alaska, around 30 knots by the Bristol Bay area. And finally, looking at our turbulence map, we will see the same area where we saw the strongest winds out by the central and eastern Aleutian Islands. Moderate turbulence is expected below 4,000 feet. I'm David Kramer. Thanks for watching.